Every story has a moment that changes everything. One choice, one secret, one person who walks in and turns your whole world upside down. Welcome to Lily Romance Tale, where we live for those moments. Stay close, things are about to get intense. Prologue. Aquila didn't faint at the altar. She ran. The music was still playing, the guests were still smiling, her father was still standing proudly beside her, but all she could see was Ethan's hand on Eunice's waist 3 nights earlier, fingers pressing too familiarly against her sister's hip in the dimly lit stables. She had told herself she imagined it. Until this morning. Until she saw the mark on Eunice's neck. And now the priest was asking, "Do you?" "No." The word slipped out before she could stop it. Gasps filled the chapel. Ethan's smile didn't fade. It sharpened. And that was when Aquila understood something far more terrifying than betrayal. He had expected this. And outside the chapel doors, wolves were already waiting. The Harlow estate had been dying for years. No one said it aloud, but everyone knew. Their lands had shrunk, their trade routes were unstable, their debts were whispered about behind fans and gloves at noble gatherings. The only solution was Ethan Blackmore. He was charming, powerful, heir to one of the strongest packs in the region. If Aquila married him, her family would survive. If she didn't, they would fall. Her father reminded her of this daily. "It is not just a marriage," he would say. "It is survival." And Aquila had agreed. She had grown up with Ethan. He used to braid flowers into her hair. He used to promise he would build her a palace. But people change. 6 months ago, the Alpha King, Elliot Draxon, had visited their estate on political business. He arrived without warning. Dark coat, silver eyes, reputation soaked in fear. Aquila remembered how the air had shifted when he stepped into the room. Conversations died. Even Ethan stiffened. Elliot's gaze had found hers immediately. Held it. Too long. "Are you happy?" he asked her quietly later that evening when they crossed paths in the corridor. It wasn't polite conversation. It was accusation. She had bristled. "That's not your concern." "Everything in my territory is my concern," he replied smoothly. His eyes flicked toward Ethan across the hall. "Especially lies." She had slapped him. The sound echoed. He didn't react with anger. He smiled. And that unsettled her more than fury would have. That night she dreamed of silver eyes. And she told no one. 3 nights before the wedding she couldn't sleep. She walked toward the stables for air. And she heard it. A breathless laugh, a whisper. Ethan's voice, Eunice's moan. She froze, peered through the wooden slats, and saw her fiancé's hands gripping her sister's waist, kissing her neck, promising something Aquila couldn't hear. The world didn't shatter, it hollowed. She didn't scream, didn't confront them. She returned to her room and stared at her reflection until sunrise. The next morning, Eunice smiled at her over breakfast. Too sweet, too innocent. And there was a faint mark on her throat. Aquila swallowed her rage. She would endure, for her family, for survival. But on the wedding day, as she stood at the altar, something felt wrong. Not just betrayal, something else. Ethan wasn't nervous. He wasn't emotional. He looked triumphant. Like a man who had already won. And when she whispered, "Why?" under her breath, he leaned closer and murmured something that made her blood run cold. "You don't get to back out. Not please don't, not I love you, a threat." Her gaze darted to the chapel doors. She saw Ethan's pack stationed outside, not celebratory, guarding, waiting for her. Suddenly, her mind connected pieces she hadn't wanted to see. The affair wasn't a mistake. It was leverage. If she exposed it, her family would collapse publicly. If she ran, Ethan could claim she was unstable. If she refused, her father would beg her to reconsider. She was trapped. And then she saw something else. Through the chapel window, a black carriage parked on the distant road. Unmarked, alone, watching, her breath caught. She knew that carriage. She had seen it once before when Elliot visited. It was his. When your own wedding becomes a cage and the only exit leads to a king you once slapped, do you choose the devil you know, or the one who asked if you were happy? Chapter 1. The wedding dress had cost more than the Harlow estate could afford. Aquila knew this because she had seen the invoice tucked beneath her mother's pillow, the numbers circled in red ink. 3,000 silver marks. For a family drowning in debt, it was obscene. But appearances mattered, her father had insisted. Especially now. Especially when the groom was Ethan Blackmore. She stood before the mirror in her childhood bedroom, watching her mother fuss with the train. The fabric pooled around her feet like spilled milk, pristine and suffocating. Through the window, she could see the estate grounds. Yeah, what used to be lush gardens were now overgrown with weeds. The stables needed repairs, Half the staff had been dismissed last month. The Harlow name was crumbling, and this dress was supposed to save it. "You look beautiful," her mother whispered. But her eyes were wet, not with joy, with relief, the kind that came when a burden was finally about to be lifted. Aquila forced a smile. "Thank you." Her sister Eunice appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her bridesmaid gown, pale blue silk that made her look angelic. She had always been the prettier one, people said. Softer, more agreeable. Aquila had learned early that being the eldest meant being the useful one, not the beloved one. "Father wants to see you," Eunice said. Her voice was sweet, but there was something underneath it, something Aquila couldn't name. Their mother kissed Aquila's cheek and left, pulling Eunice with her. For a moment, Aquila was alone. She pressed her palm against the cool glass of the window and looked toward the western border of their land. It used to extend for miles. Now it stopped just past the orchards, sold off piece by piece to pay creditors. Her father had explained it carefully last year. They had two choices: marry her to someone powerful or lose everything. Ethan had been the obvious answer. They had grown up together. Their estates bordered each other. He used to chase her through the fields when they were children, laughing, pulling her braids, promising her the world. And when he'd proposed 6 months ago, it had felt inevitable. Not romantic, just necessary. Her father was waiting in his study. The room smelled of old leather and desperation. So he stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring at nothing. "Aquila," he said without turning, "do you understand what today means?" "Yes, father." "This marriage is not just a union, it is survival." His voice cracked slightly. "The Blackmore Alliance will restore our trade routes. Ethan's pack will protect our borders, his wealth will clear our debts." He finally looked at her, and she saw the exhaustion carved into his face. "You are saving this family." The weight of it pressed down on her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, to ask why it had to be her, but she knew the answer, because she was the eldest, because Eunice was too delicate, because her mother was too weak, because her father had failed. "I understand," she said quietly. He crossed the room and gripped her shoulders. "Ethan is a good man. He will take care of you." She nodded, even though something cold had settled in her stomach. Ethan had changed over the years. The boy who braided flowers into her hair had become someone else, someone harder. His smiles had edges now. His touch lingered too long in places that made her uncomfortable, but she pushed those thoughts away. She was being ungrateful, paranoid. The wedding was set to begin in 2 hours. Guests were already arriving. She could hear carriages on the gravel drive, the murmur of voices, the musicians tuning their instruments. Everything was perfect, scripted, inescapable. She returned to her room to finish preparing. Eunice was there again, adjusting her own hair in the mirror. She turned when Aquila entered, and for just a second something flickered across her face. Guilt? Triumph? It vanished too quickly to read. "Are you nervous?" Eunice asked. "A little." "Ethan is lucky to have you." The words should have been kind, but they felt hollow, rehearsed. Aquila studied her sister, really looked at her. Eunice had always been the one everyone adored, the one who never had to carry the weight of expectations. And yet, there was something different about her lately. She smiled too much, avoided eye contact. And when Ethan visited the estate last week, Aquila had noticed the way Eunice's gaze followed him, lingered. "Eunice," Aquila said carefully, "has Ethan ever said anything to you? About me?" Her sister's expression went blank. "What do you mean?" "I don't know, just, does he seem happy?" "About the wedding?" Eunice laughed, but it sounded forced. "Of course he's happy. Why wouldn't he be?" She moved toward the door, her hand on the knob. "I should go help Mother with the guests." And she was gone. Aquila stood alone in the silence. Something was wrong. She couldn't name it, couldn't prove it, but it crawled beneath her skin like an itch she couldn't scratch. She thought about the way Ethan had kissed her hand last week. Too formal, too distant. The way he'd looked at Eunice when he thought no one was watching. The way her sister had blushed and turned away. She shook her head. She was imagining things. The stress was making her paranoid. But as she descended the stairs an hour later, her hand gripping the banister, she saw them. Ethan and Eunice. In the hallway just outside the parlor, standing too close. His hand brushed her arm. Eunice glanced up at him, her lips parted. Her eyes soft in a way Aquila had never seen directed at anyone. And then Ethan leaned down and whispered something in her sister's ear that made Eunice's breath hitch. Aquila froze on the stairs. They didn't see her. Ethan stepped back, adjusted his cuffs, and walked away as if nothing had happened. Eunice pressed her fingers to her mouth, her cheeks flushed before disappearing into the parlor. Aquila's heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She told herself she had misread the moment, that it was nothing, just a brother-in-law comforting his nervous future sister. But when she finally reached the bottom of the stairs and saw Eunice laughing with the guests, radiant and innocent, Aquila couldn't shake the feeling that something had just shattered, and she had no idea how much worse it was about to get. Chapter 2. Aquila couldn't sleep. The wedding was 3 nights away, and her mind refused to quiet. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that moment on the stairs. Ethan's hand on Eunice's arm, the whisper, the flush on her sister's cheeks. She had spent the past 2 days convincing herself it meant nothing, that she was being irrational, that the pressure of the wedding was twisting innocent moments into something sinister. But the doubt gnawed at her like a persistent ache. She threw off the covers and stood, her bare feet cold against the wooden floor. The house was silent. Everyone had retired hours ago, exhausted from the endless preparations. Aquila pulled a shawl over her nightgown and slipped out of her room. She needed air, space to think. Maybe a walk to the stables would clear her head. The night was cool. The moon half hidden behind clouds. She moved quietly across the grounds, her breath misting in the air. The stables were at the far edge of the property, nestled against the tree line. She had always loved it there as a child. The smell of hay and horses, the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. It had been her sanctuary. But as she approached, she heard something that made her stop. A laugh. Breathless, feminine. Her heart stuttered. She moved closer, careful to stay in the shadows. The stable doors were partially open, lamplight spilling out into the darkness. And then she heard it again. Not just a laugh this time. A soft, desperate sound, a moan. Her hands went numb. She stepped closer, her pulse roaring in her ears, and peered through the gap in the wooden slats. Ethan was there, and so was Eunice. Her sister's back was pressed against one of the stall doors, her hands tangled in Ethan's hair. His mouth was on her neck, his fingers gripping her waist with a familiarity that could only come from repetition. This wasn't the first time. Aquila could see it in the way they moved together, the ease of it, the rhythm. Eunice's head tipped back, her eyes closed, her lips parted in pleasure. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered, but her hands pulled him closer even as she said it. Ethan's laugh was low, dark. "After the wedding, we won't have to hide." Aquila's breath caught, her vision blurred at the edges. "You promise?" Eunice's voice was small, needy. "I promise." Ethan kissed her again, slower this time, deliberate. "Once I'm married to her, everything will be easier. The estate will be secured, the alliance finalized. And you and I," he trailed off, his hand sliding lower. "We'll have everything we need." Eunice sighed against his mouth. "I hate lying to her." "Do you?" Ethan pulled back just enough to look at her, and there was something cruel in his smile. "Because you've been doing it for months without much trouble." Eunice flinched, but she didn't argue. Instead, she kissed him again, harder, as if she could erase the guilt with passion. Aquila stumbled backward, her hand pressed against her mouth to keep from making a sound. Her chest felt hollow, empty, as if someone had reached inside and carved out everything vital. She wanted to scream, to storm in there and tear them apart, to demand answers. But her body wouldn't move, her voice wouldn't come. Instead, she turned and walked away. Her legs carried her back to the house on instinct. Her mind a blank slate of shock. She climbed the stairs, returned to her room, and closed the door behind her. Then she stood in front of the mirror and stared at her reflection. The same face, the same eyes. But the woman looking back at her felt like a stranger. Months. They had been doing this for months. While Aquila had been planning the wedding, while she had been reassuring herself that marrying Ethan was the right choice, while her father had been begging her to save the family. Ethan and Eunice had been together, touching, kissing, making promises. And the worst part, the part that made her stomach turn, was what Ethan had said. "Once I'm married to her, everything will be easier." He didn't love her. He had never loved her. This marriage wasn't even about the alliance her father thought it was. It was about something else. Something Aquila didn't fully understand yet, but she could feel the shape of it. Cold and calculated. She was a transaction, a tool. And Eunice, her own sister, had helped sharpen the blade. Aquila sank onto the edge of her bed, her hands trembling. She should tell someone, her father, her mother. She should call off the wedding, expose them both. But even as the thoughts formed, she knew she wouldn't. Because what would happen if she did? Her father would be devastated. The alliance would collapse, the estate would fall, the family would be ruined, and Ethan would deny it. Eunice would cry and play the victim. Aquila would be the hysterical bride who couldn't handle the pressure, the unstable daughter who destroyed everything. She had no proof, just her word against theirs. And who would believe her? She lay down, still fully dressed, and stared at the ceiling until the sky began to lighten. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She just lay there, hollowed out, trying to figure out how to survive the next 3 days. The morning came too quickly. Aquila forced herself to rise, to dress, to go downstairs, and sit at the breakfast table with her family as if nothing had changed. Eunice was already there, bright and cheerful, spreading jam on her toast. "Good morning," Eunice said with a smile. Too sweet, too innocent. Aquila looked at her sister and saw a stranger. "Morning," she replied, her voice flat. Her mother frowned. "Are you feeling well, dear? You look pale." "I didn't sleep much." "Wedding nerves," her father said with a chuckle. "Perfectly normal." Aquila nodded and reached for her tea. Her hands were steady, her face was calm. She had learned, somewhere in the long hours of the night, how to bury the pain deep enough that no one could see it. Eunice chatted about flower arrangements. Her mother discussed seating charts. Her father read the morning paper. And Aquila sat among them, silent and still, a ghost at her own table. She made it through breakfast, through the afternoon fittings, through dinner, and then as the sun set and the guests began to arrive for the rehearsal dinner, Aquila found herself standing in the hallway outside the dining room. Ethan was there, adjusting his jacket, his back to her. She should have walked away, should have kept her silence. But something in her snapped. "Ethan!" He turned, his smile easy and practiced. "Aquila, you look lovely." She stepped closer, her voice low. "Are you happy?" About the wedding." His smile didn't falter, but something shifted in his eyes. A flicker of calculation. "Of course! Why do you ask?" "Just curious." He studied her for a moment, his gaze sharp, assessing. And then he reached out and brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture tender and false. "You're not getting cold feet, are you?" "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. His hand lingered at her cheek, his thumb brushing her jaw. "Good. Because we wouldn't want anything to ruin this, would we?" It wasn't a question, it was a warning. And as he walked past her into the dining room, Aquila realized with a creeping sense of dread that Ethan knew. He knew she had seen something, and he was daring her to do something about it. Chapter 3, 6 months earlier, Aquila had never heard of Elliot Jackson. She knew of him. Well, of course, everyone did. The Alpha King was a legend whispered about in parlors and pack meetings. Ruthless, powerful, a man who had unified the Northern Territories through strength and strategy, who commanded loyalty through fear as much as respect. But he had always seemed distant, a figure from stories rather than reality, until the day he arrived at the Harlow estate, unannounced. Aquila had been in the library reviewing the household accounts when she heard the commotion. Raised voices, the frantic shuffle of servants, her father's strained laughter. She set down her pen and moved to the doorway, curious about what could cause such disruption. The air in the entrance hall had changed. That was the first thing she noticed. It felt heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. The servants stood rigid, their eyes downcast. Her father wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And standing in the center of it all, removing his riding gloves with casual precision, was a man who made the room feel smaller just by existing. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black from head to toe. His dark hair was slightly disheveled from the ride, and when he lifted his gaze, Aquila's breath caught. Silver eyes, like moonlight on steel. They found her immediately, cutting through the space between them with unnerving accuracy. For a moment she couldn't move, couldn't look away. There was something predatory in the way he watched her, as if he could see beneath her skin, past the polite mask she wore for society. "Lord Harlow," Elliot said, his voice deep and controlled, though his eyes never left Aquila. "I hope my arrival isn't too inconvenient." "Not at all." "Your Majesty," her father stammered. "We are honored by your presence. Please come in. Let us prepare refreshments." "That won't be necessary. I'm here on political business. A brief visit." But his gaze lingered on Aquila, and she felt something stir in her chest. Not fear exactly, something else. Something that made her heart race and her hands clench at her sides. She should have curtsied, should have lowered her eyes respectfully. Instead, she lifted her chin and met his stare head on. His lips curved into the barest hint of a smile. The meeting was tense. Elliot discussed territorial boundaries, trade agreements, pack alliances. Aquila's father nodded and agreed to everything, clearly desperate to stay in the Alpha King's good graces. Ethan had been there too, stiff and formal, his usual charm muted in Elliot's presence. Aquila had excused herself halfway through, unable to bear the suffocating tension any longer. She retreated to the gardens, seeking air and solitude. But solitude, it seemed, was not meant for her that day. Running away? She spun around. Elliot stood a few paces behind her, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. I wasn't aware I needed permission to walk in my own garden, she said, sharper than she intended. You don't. He stepped closer, and she fought the urge to step back. But you looked like you were fleeing something, or someone. I simply needed air. Understandable. Your fiancé is rather exhausting, isn't he? The comment caught her off guard. She blinked. Excuse me? Elliot tilted his head, studying her with those unsettling silver eyes. Ethan Blackmore, you're engaged to him. Yes? That's none of your concern. Everything in my territory is my concern, he said smoothly, echoing the words he would repeat months later. Especially when I see a woman being sold like livestock. Anger flared in her chest, hot and sudden. How dare you? Am I wrong? He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and smoke and something darker, something wild. Your family's estate is failing. Ethan's pack is powerful. The marriage secures an alliance. You gain stability. He gains legitimacy and land. A perfectly reasonable transaction. Her hand moved before she could think. The slap rang out across the garden, sharp and loud. Elliot's head turned slightly with the force of it. But he didn't move otherwise. Didn't flinch. Didn't react with the anger she expected. Instead, he slowly turned back to face her, again one hand rising to touch his reddening cheek. And he smiled, not a cruel smile, not mocking, something else. Something that looked almost like satisfaction. There it is, he murmured. There's what? She demanded, her hand still stinging. Proof that you're not as resigned as you pretend to be. She wanted to slap him again, wanted to scream at him for his arrogance, for his intrusion, for seeing things she didn't want to see. But her voice came out quieter than she intended. You know nothing about me. I know you're stronger than they give you credit for. His gaze dropped to her clenched fists, then back to her eyes. I know you're suffocating in that house, and I know that Ethan Blackmore doesn't deserve you. Her breath hitched. Stop! Why? Because the truth makes you uncomfortable? Because you're overstepping? Perhaps. He stepped back, giving her space, though his presence still filled every inch of air between them. But someone should tell you before it's too late. Before what's too late? His expression darkened. Before you trap yourself in a cage, you'll never escape. She wanted to argue, to defend her choices, to insist that she knew what she was doing, that the marriage was her decision, but the words stuck in her throat. Elliot watched her struggle, and something shifted in his gaze, something softer, almost regretful. Forgive me, he said quietly. I shouldn't have spoken so freely. It's not my place. He turned to leave, and she should have let him go. Should have been relieved, but instead she found herself speaking. Why do you care? He paused, his back still to her. For a long moment he said nothing, and then without turning around he answered. Because I've seen what happens to women who sacrifice themselves for families that don't deserve it, and I'd prefer not to see it happen to you. He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the shadows of the estate. That night she lay awake, her hand still tingling from where it had connected with his face. She told herself she hated him, that he was arrogant and invasive and had no right to judge her life. But she couldn't stop thinking about his eyes, the way they had seen through her so easily, the way he had smiled after she slapped him, as if she had confirmed something he already knew. And she dreamed of Silver. 2 days later, Elliot left the estate as abruptly as he had arrived. But before he went, he found her one last time, in the corridor, alone. He didn't touch her, didn't step too close. He simply looked at her with those piercing eyes and asked a question that would haunt her for months. Are you happy? Not content, not satisfied. Happy. She opened her mouth to answer, to lie, to say of course she was happy. Why wouldn't she be? But the words wouldn't come. And Elliot's expression shifted into something devastating, understanding, pity, and beneath it all, something that looked like barely restrained fury. He leaned in just slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. When you're ready to stop pretending, he said, you know where to find me. Then he was gone. And Aquila stood frozen in that corridor, her heart pounding, her mind spinning, trying to understand why the Alpha King's question felt more dangerous than any threat Ethan had ever made. Chapter 4, the morning of the wedding, Aquila woke with a sense of inevitability pressing down on her chest. She had survived the past 3 days through sheer force of will, moving through the motions like a puppet on strings, smiling when expected, nodding when appropriate, keeping her devastation locked so deep inside that even she could almost forget it was there. Almost. Eunice had knocked on her door at dawn, her voice bright and cheerful. "Today's the day! Are you excited?" Aquila had stared at her sister's reflection in the mirror, at the false sweetness in her eyes, and wondered how she had never noticed the cruelty before. "Of course," she'd replied, her voice hollow. Now, hours later, she stood in her wedding dress, surrounded by fussing hands and nervous chatter. Her mother wept quietly in the corner. Distant relatives she barely knew offered empty congratulations. And through it all, Aquila felt nothing. She had hollowed herself out to make room for survival. The mark on Eunice's neck had faded, but Aquila could still see it. A ghost of betrayal that haunted every glance, every smile her sister threw in her direction. Eunice had even helped her into the dress, her fingers gentle and careful, as if she truly cared, as if she hadn't been tangled in Ethan's arms just nights before. "You look beautiful," Eunice whispered, adjusting the veil. Aquila met her eyes in the mirror. "Thank you." If Eunice noticed the ice in her voice, she didn't show it. The chapel was full. Every important family in the region had come to witness the union of Harlow and Blackmore. The musicians played softly, candles flickered. The scent of roses was overwhelming, cloying. Aquila walked down the aisle on her father's arm, and she could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her from every direction. But it was the wolves that caught her attention. They lined the outer edges of the chapel, Ethan's pack members, dressed formally but positioned strangely, not seated with the guests, not celebrating, standing, watching. Their eyes tracked her movement down the aisle with an intensity that made her skin prickle. This wasn't normal. She had been to pack weddings before. The wolves always celebrated, always sat among the guests, always participated in the joy. But these wolves looked like sentries, like guards. That her father squeezed her arm gently, mistaking her hesitation for nerves. "Almost there, my dear." Ethan stood at the altar, impossibly handsome in his formal attire. His smile was perfect, practiced. When her father placed her hand in his, Ethan's fingers closed around hers, with just enough pressure to hurt. A warning. The priest began the ceremony, his voice droning through the familiar words. Aquila heard none of it. Her mind was focused on Ethan's hand, on the wolves stationed too carefully around the room, on the way her sister stood among the bridesmaids with tears in her eyes that looked more like guilt than joy. And then she saw it. Through the stained glass window, partially obscured by trees, a black carriage sat on the distant road. Unmarked. Alone. She recognized it instantly. She had seen it 6 months ago when Elliot Draxon had visited. Her pulse quickened. He was here, watching. Why? "Aquila!" She startled, realizing Ethan had spoken. His smile hadn't wavered, but his eyes were sharp, cold. "Pay attention," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "People are watching." She nodded, her throat tight. The priest continued. Ethan's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, a gesture that might have looked affectionate to anyone watching. But his grip was firm, controlling. And then, so quietly she almost missed it, he spoke. "Why?" she whispered. The question slipped out before she could stop it. She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but the word hung in the air between them, fragile and desperate. Ethan leaned closer, his smile never faltering, and whispered back. Why what? Why are you doing this?" His eyes flickered with something dark, amused. "Because I can." Her blood turned to ice. He straightened, addressing the priest with easy charm. "My apologies. Continue, please." But his hand tightened around hers again, and this time when he leaned in, his voice was barely audible, a breath against her ear. "You don't get to back out." Not a plea, not a request, a command. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth she had been avoiding. This wasn't about love. It had never been about love. This was about control, about power, about securing something she didn't fully understand yet, but could feel the shape of. She was a piece on a board, a move in a game, and Ethan had already decided the outcome. Her gaze darted to the chapel doors. The wolves were closer now. 2 of them stood directly in front of the exit, their postures casual but their attention fixed. On her. Not on the ceremony. On her. They weren't there to celebrate. They were there to make sure she didn't run. Panic clawed at her throat. She looked back at Ethan, and he was watching her with that same triumphant expression, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking, as if he had anticipated every move. "You're trapped," he murmured, his smile widening. "And everyone here will make sure you stay that way." Her mind raced. If she exposed the affair now, her family would be ruined. If she fled, Ethan would claim she was unstable and his wolves would drag her back. If she went through with it, she would be bound to a man who saw her as property. There was no way out, except her eyes found the window again. The black carriage, still there, still waiting. Elliot's voice echoed in her memory. When you're ready to stop pretending, you know where to find me. The priest's voice cut through her thoughts. Do you, Aquila Harlow, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or worse, in sickness and in health until death do you part? The chapel fell silent. Every eye turned to her. Ethan's hand tightened, his smile sharp as a blade. Her father watched with desperate hope. Eunice stood frozen, her face pale, and outside, beyond the chapel walls, wolves waited. The word formed in her throat, the word she was supposed to say, the word that would save her family and destroy her. But when she opened her mouth, something else came out. Something she hadn't planned. Something that shattered the perfect facade Ethan had built. No. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Gasps rippled through the chapel. Her father's face went white. Eunice's hand flew to her mouth, and Ethan's smile didn't fade. It sharpened. His eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like satisfaction, as if she had just confirmed exactly what he expected, as if this was all part of a plan she couldn't see. Aquila, he said softly, his voice carrying just enough to sound concerned, loving even. You're overwhelmed. It's all right. We can— But she wasn't listening. She tore her hand from his grip, lifted her skirts, and ran. Chapter 5. The chapel erupted behind her. Shouts. Her father's desperate voice calling her name. The scrape of chairs as guests rose in confusion, but Aquila didn't look back. She gathered the heavy fabric of her dress in both hands and ran. The chapel doors burst open as she slammed through them, the wood cracking against the stone walls. Sunlight blinded her momentarily, but she didn't slow. Her slippers caught on the gravel path, nearly sending her sprawling. But she recovered and pushed forward. Behind her, she heard Ethan's voice, calm and controlled. Don't let her leave the grounds. Not shouted, not panicked, a simple command, and the wolves moved. She heard them before she saw them, the rustle of movement, the synchronized shift of bodies. They weren't chasing yet. They were positioning, cutting off exits, herding her like prey. Terror shot through her veins like lightning. The forest path was her only option. What if she could reach the trees? She might have a chance to hide, to think, to figure out what to do next. But the moment she left the manicured grounds and hit the dirt path, she knew the truth. Her scent would betray her within minutes. Wolves didn't need to see to hunt. They could track her through the forest, through the darkness, across miles if necessary. Her human form was no match for their speed, their senses, their singular focus. Unless. Her hand went to her shoe, fingers fumbling with the hidden compartment she had sewn into the sole weeks ago. At the time, she had told herself it was paranoia, a precaution she would never need. But some part of her, some instinct she hadn't wanted to acknowledge, had known this moment might come. The small glass vial came free, no bigger than her thumb, filled with a bitter-smelling liquid that looked black in the sunlight. She had purchased it from a healer in the forest markets, an old woman with knowing eyes who asked no questions. Only use it if you truly wish to disappear, the woman had warned. It will mask your scent for a short time, but it comes at a cost. Your wolf will be silenced, you'll be vulnerable. Aquila hadn't cared about the cost then. She cared even less now. She smashed the vial against her wrist as she ran, the glass cutting into her skin, the liquid soaked into her flesh, cold and burning at once. It spread through her veins like ice water, and she felt her wolf recoil, retreating deep inside her, unable to surface. The sensation was horrifying, like losing a limb, like being hollowed out. But her scent began to blur. Behind her she heard confused shouts. The wolves had reached the forest edge, and their certainty had faltered. They could no longer pinpoint her exact location. She had bought herself time. Not much, but enough. Her lungs burned as she pushed deeper into the woods, her dress catching on branches, tearing, slowing her down. She tore at the fabric frantically, ripping away the train, the delicate lace, anything that might snag. Her veil had fallen away somewhere behind her. Her carefully pinned hair tumbled loose. She looked nothing like a bride anymore. She looked like someone fleeing for her life. The trees thinned ahead, and she saw the road. The main road that led away from the estate, toward the neighboring territories. If she could reach it, if she could find a traveler, a merchant, anyone, she might be able to get far enough away that Ethan couldn't simply drag her back. But even as the thought formed, she heard the howls. They were hunting in earnest now. The vial had confused them, but they were adapting, spreading out, searching systematically, and once the liquid wore off, they would find her immediately. She burst from the tree line onto the road, gasping, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break. The road stretched in both directions, empty except for one thing: the black carriage. It sat exactly where she had seen it through the chapel window, perhaps 50 yards down the road, unmarked, silent. The horses stood perfectly still, as if they had been waiting, as if they knew. She didn't think, didn't question, didn't wonder why it was there or who might be inside. She ran toward it. Her bare feet slapped against the packed dirt road. The dress, even torn and ragged, still weighed her down. She could hear the wolves closer now, breaking through the forest behind her, their growls low and determined. 20 yards. Her vision tunneled. The carriage was all she could see. 10 yards. Behind her, a wolf burst onto the road. Then another. 5 yards. She reached for the carriage door handle, her fingers slipping on the polished metal. And then it opened. From the inside. A hand reached out, strong and sure, and grabbed her wrist, pulling her up and in with a force that knocked the breath from her lungs. She tumbled into the carriage, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of torn white fabric and heaving breaths. The door slammed shut behind her. The carriage lurched into motion immediately, the horses moving with sudden urgency. She heard a wolf slam into the side of the carriage, claws scraping against wood, but they were already moving too fast. She lay on the floor, gasping, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand where she was and who had pulled her inside. And then she smelled it. Leather, smoke, something darker, something she remembered. Her head lifted slowly. Elliot Draxon sat across from her, one leg crossed over the other, his posture relaxed despite the chaos outside. His silver eyes watched her with that same unreadable intensity she remembered from 6 months ago. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look concerned. He looked like a man who had been expecting her. "You're late," he said calmly, as if they were meeting for tea rather than fleeing a pack of hunting wolves. Aquila stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up. You knew." "I suspected," he corrected, his tone almost gentle. Outside, she heard Ethan's voice, sharp and commanding, ordering his wolves to stop, to regroup. The carriage didn't slow. If anything, it moved faster. Elliot reached down and helped her into the seat across from him, his touch impersonal but steady. She couldn't stop shaking, couldn't catch her breath. "How did you know?" she whispered. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled a dark cloak from the bench beside him and draped it over her shoulders, covering the torn wedding dress. The fabric was heavy, warm, and it smelled like him. "Because men like Ethan Blackmore are predictable," he finally said. "They trap, they manipulate, and they always underestimate the women they try to cage." The carriage hit a rough patch of road, jostling them both. Aquila gripped the edge of the seat, her knuckles white. "He'll come after me," she said. "He won't just let me go." Elliot's expression darkened. "I know." "Then why are you helping me?" His gaze held hers, and something flickered in those silver depths, something that looked almost like fury, not at her, for her. "Because," he said quietly, "a man who cages a woman before she says I do does not deserve to keep her." Before she could respond, the carriage slowed. She heard voices outside, Ethan's voice. Her blood turned to ice. Elliot stood smoothly, blocking her from view with his body. He moved to the door, opened it slightly, and stepped partially outside. She couldn't see what was happening. But she heard every word. "Your Majesty!" Ethan's voice was tight, controlled. "I'm searching for my bride. She's unwell, confused. I need to bring her back." "I haven't seen her," Elliot said, his tone flat and dismissive. "She was headed this direction. The wolves tracked her scent to the road." "Then your wolves lost her." There was steel beneath the words, a warning, a pause. Tension so thick, Aquila could feel it pressing against her chest. "If I may search the carriage." "You may not." The words were absolute. Final, another pause, longer this time. Then Ethan's voice strained. "Of course, Your Majesty. My apologies." Footsteps retreated. Elliot climbed back into the carriage and closed the door. The vehicle lurched forward again, faster now, putting distance between them and the estate. Aquila stared at him, her mind reeling. "You lied. For me." "Yes." "Why?" He leaned back against the seat, his eyes never leaving hers. And when he spoke, his voice was low, dangerous, and utterly certain. "Because I've been watching Ethan Blackmore for a long time, and I know exactly what he planned to do with you after the wedding." Her heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" Elliot's jaw tightened. "Tell me, did he ever mention an alliance, a political arrangement he was negotiating?" She shook her head, fear creeping up her spine. His expression turned grim. Then it's worse than I thought. The carriage rolled on into the unknown, carrying her further from everything she had ever known, and Aquila realized with a sick, plummeting certainty that escaping the wedding had only been the beginning. Whatever Ethan had planned, whatever conspiracy she had stumbled into, she was now completely at the mercy of the Alpha King, and she had no idea if that was salvation or a different kind of trap. Chapter 6. The carriage rolled through unfamiliar territory, the rhythm of hooves on packed earth the only sound besides Aquila's ragged breathing. She sat across from Elliot Jackson, still wrapped in his cloak, trying to process everything that had just happened. Her wedding, her escape, the wolves, and now this, him. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse. "Away from men who treat women like currency," Elliot replied, his gaze fixed on the window. "Beyond that, I haven't decided. You can't just kidnap me." His eyes cut to hers, sharp and assessing. "Would you prefer I take you back?" She fell silent. The answer was obvious, and they both knew it. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Let me be clear about something, Aquila. I'm not holding you captive. When we reach the next town, if you want to leave, I won't stop you. But if you do, Ethan will find you within a day. And when he does, you won't get another chance to run." "How do you know that?" "Because I know him." Elliot's voice was cold, certain. "I've watched him operate for years. He doesn't make mistakes, he plans, he manipulates, and he doesn't let valuable assets slip away." The word made her stomach turn. Assets. "That's what you were to him. That's what you've always been." She wanted to argue, to defend the boy who once braided flowers in her hair, but the words died in her throat. That boy was gone. Maybe he had never existed at all. "You said he planned something," she said quietly. "An alliance. What did you mean?" Elliot studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. Then he sat back, his expression grave. 3 months ago, Ethan met with representatives from the Eastern Coalition. They're a group of alphas looking to expand their territory, consolidate power. They need legitimacy, connections to establish bloodlines. What does that have to do with me? Everything. His gaze was unflinching. Your family's estate may be failing, but your bloodline is old, respected. Marrying you gives Ethan access to your family's historical alliances, their trade agreements, their territorial claims. But more importantly, it gives him something to trade. Her blood went cold. Trade? Once you were legally bound to him. He could negotiate on your behalf, arrange secondary alliances, essentially transfer your family's assets and connections to the coalition in exchange for power, territory, and protection. He paused, letting that sink in. You wouldn't have been his wife, Aquila. You would have been his bargaining chip. She felt sick. My father, he wouldn't have agreed to that. Your father wouldn't have known until it was too late. And by then, what could he do? You'd be married, legally bound. Any agreements Ethan made would be binding. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. The affair with Eunice, the wolves positioned at the chapel, Ethan's calm certainty when she said no. He had anticipated resistance. He had planned for it. The entire wedding had been a trap designed to look like salvation. Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. 6 months ago, when you visited. You knew something was wrong. Why didn't you warn me?" Elliot's expression softened, just slightly. "Would you have believed me? A stranger making accusations about your childhood friend, your arranged husband, the man your family was counting on to save them." He shook his head. "You would have thought I was trying to sabotage the alliance for political gain. You would have hated me more than you already did." He was right. She would have dismissed him as manipulative, cruel. She had slapped him for less. "So you just watched?" The anger in her voice surprised her. "You knew I was walking into a trap and you did nothing?" "I did what I could," he said, his tone sharpening. "I investigated. I gathered evidence. And I made sure I understood exactly what Ethan was planning so that when the moment came, I could act. And if I hadn't run, if I had said yes," his jaw tightened, "then I would have found another way." "What way?" He didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Aquila tried to imagine what the Alpha King might have done if she had gone through with the wedding. Would he have stopped it? Declared the marriage invalid? Started a war? The carriage hit a bump, jostling them both. She gripped the edge of the seat, her mind racing. "Eunice," she said suddenly, "my sister, did she know?" Elliot's expression turned carefully neutral. "What makes you ask?" "She was sleeping with him. I saw them 3 nights ago." The words tasted bitter. Ew, she knew I was marrying him and she didn't care. Something dark flickered across Elliot's face. Not surprise, something else. You already knew, Aquila realized, her voice hollow. You knew about the affair? I suspected. How long? Long enough to wonder if it was part of his plan. She stared at him. What are you saying? Elliot leaned forward again, his voice low and deliberate. Ethan is not a man who acts on impulse. Every move he makes serves a purpose. So ask yourself, why would he risk an affair with your sister? Why would he leave evidence? Why would he allow you to discover them? Her mind recoiled from the implication. No, he wouldn't. Even he wouldn't be that cruel. Wouldn't he? Elliot's eyes were hard. Think about it. If you discovered the affair and stayed silent, he had leverage. Proof of your complicity, your weakness. If you exposed it, your family would be humiliated, and he could play the victim. Either way, he maintained control. The truth of it crashed over her like a wave. Ethan had orchestrated everything, every moment of pain, every second of doubt. He had weaponized her love, her loyalty, her desperation to save her family. And Eunice? Her voice cracked. Was she just a tool? Perhaps. Elliot's expression was grim. Or perhaps she knew exactly what she was doing and chose to help him anyway. Aquila's hands trembled. She pulled the cloak tighter around herself, trying to hold together the pieces of herself that felt like they were shattering. Why are you telling me all this? She whispered. Because you deserve to know what you escaped. He paused, his gaze searching hers. And because what Ethan planned for after the wedding was far worse than anything you've imagined. Her heart stopped. What do you mean? Elliot's expression turned deadly serious. The Eastern Coalition doesn't just want territory, Aquila. They want heirs, bloodlines, and Ethan promised them something very specific in exchange for his alliance. His voice dropped. He promised them you. Chapter 7. The words hung in the air like poison. He promised them you. Aquila couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The carriage walls felt like they were closing in, the world shrinking to just those 4 words and the horrible, sickening understanding of what they meant. I don't understand, she whispered, though part of her did. Part of her understood perfectly and was desperately trying to deny it. Elliot's expression was carved from stone, but his eyes held something that looked almost like sympathy. The Eastern Coalition has been trying to establish legitimacy for years. They're powerful, but they're seen as outsiders, upstarts. They need connections to old bloodlines, established families. Your marriage to Ethan was the first step, but it wasn't the end goal. What was the end goal? Her voice came out hollow. Once you were legally bound to Ethan, he had the authority to negotiate on behalf of your family, to make agreements in your name. He paused, choosing his words carefully. The coalition wanted an alliance sealed through blood. Through heirs, Ethan agreed to provide that. After a suitable period, he would arrange for you to be transferred to one of the coalition alphas, as a wife, a mate. Whether you agreed or not. The horror of it crashed over her in waves. He was going to sell me. In essence, yes. To who? I don't know yet. The negotiations were still ongoing when I last gathered intelligence. Elliot's jaw tightened. But the groundwork was laid. The contracts were being drafted. All he needed was to get you to the altar, to legally bind you to him, so he had the authority to make the transfer. She thought she might be sick. Her hands gripped the edge of the seat so hard her knuckles turned white. My father. Does he know? No. Ethan kept the full scope of his plan hidden. Your father thought he was securing a simple alliance, protection for the estate in exchange for the marriage. He had no idea what would happen after. And Eunice? The question tasted like acid. Did she know? Elliot hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything she needed to know. You think she did? I think, he said carefully, that your sister has been far more involved in Ethan's schemes than you realize. But I don't have proof, only suspicions. Aquila's mind raced back through the past months, the way Eunice had encouraged the marriage, the way she had soothed Aquila's doubts, reassured her that Ethan was a good man, that everything would be fine, the way she had smiled so sweetly while carrying on an affair behind Aquila's back. Had it all been calculated? Had Eunice known what Ethan planned and helped him anyway? Why would she do that? Aquila's voice cracked. She's my sister. People do terrible things when they think it benefits them. Elliot's tone was gentle, but the truth behind it was brutal. Perhaps Ethan promised her something. She needed security, position, love even, though I doubt his capacity for it. She can't have known, she wouldn't. But even as Aquila said it, she didn't believe it. Not anymore. The carriage rolled on. taking her further from the life she had known and deeper into a reality she didn't understand. She felt untethered, like she was floating in dark water with nothing to hold on to. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again, quieter this time. "You barely know me. This isn't your fight." Elliot was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. "Because I've seen what happens when powerful men treat women as property. I've seen the damage it causes, the lives it destroys." His eyes met hers, and there was something raw in them. "And because when I visited your estate 6 months ago and saw you standing in that house, surrounded by people who were planning your future without your consent, I knew you deserved better." Something in her chest tightened. "You could have told me then, warned me." "I tried, in my own way." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You slapped me for it, if you recall." Despite everything, she felt a flicker of something that might have been humor. "You were insufferable." "I was honest." "Same thing." This time his smile reached his eyes, and for a moment the tension in the carriage eased. But only for a moment. "What happens now?" Aquila asked. "Where do we go? What do I do?" "Now," Elliot said. "We get you somewhere safe, somewhere Ethan can't reach you. And then we figure out how to dismantle whatever agreements he's made before they can be enforced." "Can you do that?" "I'm the Alpha King." His voice was matter of fact. "I can do a great many things when properly motivated." "And you're motivated to help me because—" He studied her face, his expression unreadable. "Because you're under my protection now, and I protect what's mine." The possessiveness in his words should have frightened her, should have made her pull away. But instead she felt something else, something that felt dangerously close to relief. For the first time in months, someone was on her side, someone who wasn't asking her to sacrifice herself for the greater good. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of danger." He glanced out the window. Ethan won't give up easily. He's invested too much in this plan. He'll come looking for you." "Let him." The anger in her voice surprised them both. "I'm not going back. I don't care what he threatens or what my father begs or what anyone says. I am not going back." Elliot's eyes gleamed with something that looked like approval. "Good. Hold on to that fury. You're going to need it." The carriage began to slow. Aquila tensed, fear spiking through her. "Why are we stopping?" "We're approaching an inn. We need to change horses, and you need proper clothes." He glanced at her torn wedding dress. "You're rather conspicuous." She looked down at herself, at the ruined white fabric and the borrowed cloak, and almost laughed. Almost, but the sound that came out was closer to a sob. Elliot reached across the space between them and took her hand. The gesture was unexpected, his grip warm and steady. "You're safe, Aquila. I promise you that." She wanted to believe him, needed to believe him. The carriage came to a complete stop. Elliot released her hand and moved to open the door, but before he could, there was a knock from outside. Sharp. Urgent. Elliot's expression darkened instantly. His hand went to something at his side, a weapon she hadn't noticed before. "Stay behind me," he ordered quietly. He opened the door a crack, his body blocking her view. She heard voices low and tense, and then Elliot went very still. "What is it?" she whispered. He turned back to her, his face grim. "One of my scouts just intercepted a messenger. Someone from your estate sent word to Ethan. Told him which direction we were heading." Her blood turned to ice. "Who?" Elliot's jaw clenched. "The message was signed by your sister." The world tilted. Aquila's vision swam, and she gripped the edge of the seat to keep from falling. No, she wouldn't. She couldn't. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Eunice had betrayed her again. And this time, it might cost Aquila her life. Chapter 8. The message was still clutched in Elliot's hand, the paper crumpled from his grip. Aquila stared at it, at her sister's distinctive handwriting, and felt something inside her break that she hadn't known could still shatter. "Let me see it," she said, her voice distant. Elliot hesitated, then handed it over. The words were brief, clinical. A simple report of facts that destroyed any remaining hope Aquila had held for her sister's innocence. "They're heading northwest on the main road. The girl is with the Alpha King. She wears his cloak. They stopped at the inn near Redmere Crossing. Please hurry. I'm sorry it came to this." "I'm sorry it came to this," Aquila read aloud, her voice hollow. "She's sorry." A bitter laugh escaped her throat. "She helped Ethan plan to sell me, slept with my fiancé, and now she's sorry it came to this." "We need to move," Elliot said, already turning to give orders to his driver. "Now!" But before he could step out of the carriage, Aquila grabbed his arm. Wait! Why would she do this? What does she gain? Does it matter? Yes. Her grip tightened. I need to understand. Elliot's expression softened slightly. Perhaps Ethan promised to marry her once you were gone. Perhaps he offered her the position you would have had. Perhaps she simply wanted what you had and was willing to destroy you to get it. He pulled free gently. Or perhaps she's just cruel. Some people are. The driver called out a warning, horses in the distance, moving fast. Elliot cursed under his breath. They're closer than I thought. How many? Too many! He reached for her hand. We need to abandon the carriage. It's too slow, too obvious. There's a safe house about 2 miles through the forest. If we move quickly... The first arrow struck the side of the carriage with a dull thud. Elliot shoved Aquila to the floor, covering her body with his as more arrows followed, punching through the wooden walls. She could hear shouting now, the thunder of hooves, the snarls of wolves. Stay down, Elliot growled. His eyes had changed, silver bleeding into something more primal. The wolf was close to the surface. The carriage door was ripped open. Ethan stood there, flanked by 6 of his largest pack members. His face was calm, almost pleasant, as if he'd simply come to collect something he'd misplaced. Aquila, he said warmly, there you are. You gave us quite a scare. Elliot moved between them, his presence filling the doorway. She's under my protection, Blackmore. Turn around and leave while you still can. Ethan's smile didn't waver. With all due respect, Your Majesty, this is a private matter between myself and my runaway bride. I'd hate for this to escalate into something political. It became political the moment you tried to traffic a woman across territorial lines without her consent. Traffic? Ethan laughed, the sound light and disarming. I think you've misunderstood the situation. Aquila and I had a simple wedding day panic. It happens. She just needs to come home, and we can sort this all out properly. I'm not going anywhere with you, Aquila said, her voice shaking but clear. Ethan's gaze shifted to her, and something cold flickered behind his eyes. Darling, you're not thinking clearly. The stress has obviously... I saw you, she interrupted, pushing herself up despite Elliot's warning hand. With Eunice. I know what you planned. I know about the coalition. I know everything. For the first time, Ethan's pleasant mask slipped. I see. And who told you these wild stories? Let me guess. His eyes cut to Elliot. The Alpha King has been filling your head with conspiracy theories. How convenient. They're not theories. I have documented proof of your negotiations with the Eastern Coalition, Elliot said coldly. Letters, contracts, witness testimonies. Enough to bring formal charges. Ethan's expression hardened. Then you should have brought them to the council instead of kidnapping a member of a noble family. I didn't kidnap anyone. She came willingly. Did she? Ethan's tone turned mocking. Or did you manipulate a frightened, confused girl into running away from her legal obligations? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you took advantage of a moment of panic to steal someone else's bride. The accusation was clever, dangerous. If Ethan spun this the right way, he could make Elliot look like the aggressor, like the villain. Aquila, Ethan said, his voice softening again, please, think about your family. Your father is devastated. Your mother is beside herself with worry. All those guests, all those people who came to celebrate with us, they're all waiting, wondering what happened. He extended his hand toward her. Just come home, we can fix this. She stared at his outstretched hand and felt nothing but revulsion. My answer is still no. Ethan's jaw tightened. The pleasant facade was cracking, revealing the calculating predator underneath. I'm trying to be reasonable here. Then be reasonable, Elliot said, and leave. I can't do that. Then you'll force my hand. The wolves around Ethan tensed, reading the threat in Elliot's voice. The air grew thick with the promise of violence. Aquila could feel it building the moment before the storm broke. And then Ethan smiled again. But this time it was different. Colder. More certain. I was hoping to avoid this, he said quietly, then louder. Now. Everything happened at once. The wolves surged forward, not toward Elliot, but around him. Hands grabbed Aquila from behind, yanking her backward out of the carriage through a door she hadn't realized had been opened. She screamed, struggled, but there were too many of them. Elliot roared, his form beginning to shift, but 3 wolves tackled him, dragging him down. Not to kill, to restrain, to separate. Aquila was hauled onto a horse, an arm locked around her waist like an iron band. She caught a glimpse of Elliot fighting, his eyes blazing with fury. Oh, but then they were moving, galloping away from the carriage, deeper into the forest. No, she screamed, thrashing against her captor. Let me go! But the grip only tightened. They rode for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the forest blurring around them. Finally, they stopped in a small clearing. Ethan dismounted smoothly, then reached up to pull Aquila down. She tried to fight him, but he was stronger, and she was still weakened from the scent-blocking vial. He set her on her feet, but kept one hand wrapped around her upper arm. His other hand came up to cup her face with a gentleness that made her skin crawl. "There now," he murmured. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" She jerked away from his touch. "You can't do this. Elliot will come for me." "Oh, I'm counting on it." Ethan's smile was venomous. Do you know what happens when an alpha king attacks a nobleman to steal his bride? Political disaster. His council will turn on him, his allies will question his judgment, and I'll be the wronged party, the victim. He leaned closer. By the time this is over, Elliot Draxon will be too busy defending his throne to worry about you. He'll kill you. Perhaps. But you'll be long gone by then. His fingers traced her jaw and she flinched. The coalition representatives are waiting at my estate. We'll complete the marriage tonight, and by morning you'll be on your way to your new husband, whoever he turns out to be. Nausea rolled through her. I'll fight you every step of the way. I know. He sounded almost sad about it. But it won't matter. The contracts are already signed. The agreements are in place. This was always going to happen, Aquila. You just delayed it. She wanted to scream, to rage, to hurt him the way he had hurt her. But before she could move, one of the wolves stepped forward with a small vial, similar to the one she'd used to mask her scent, but different, darker. What is that? She demanded. Ethan took it, uncorking it with practiced ease. Insurance. Can't have you running away again. He grabbed her face, forcing her jaw open. This will keep you compliant just until the ceremony is complete. She struggled, but hands held her still. The liquid poured into her mouth, bitter and burning. She tried to spit it out, but Ethan clamped his hand over her mouth and nose, forcing her to swallow or suffocate. She swallowed. The effect was almost immediate. Her limbs grew heavy. Her thoughts began to blur at the edges. She could still think, still feel, but her body wouldn't respond the way she wanted it to. Like being trapped in a dream where you try to run, but your legs won't move. There, Ethan said, releasing her. Much better. Aquila slumped, and he caught her easily, lifting her back onto the horse. Everything felt distant now. Wrong. As they began to ride again, she tried to hold on to consciousness, tried to fight the fog creeping through her mind. But it was so hard, so heavy. The last thought she had before the darkness took her was of silver eyes and a promise. I protect what's mine. She hoped Elliot would come. She hoped he would sense the danger. But as the world faded to black, she couldn't shake the terrible fear that this time, hope wouldn't be enough. Somewhere behind them, miles away but closing fast, Elliot Draxon stopped mid-stride, his head jerked up, his entire body going rigid. The bond he had never told Aquila about, the connection he had felt since the moment he first saw her, suddenly flared with alarm. Something was wrong. She was in danger, and he was too far away to stop it. Chapter 9, the drug kept Aquila suspended in a gray haze, aware but unable to move, unable to speak. She felt herself being carried into a room, heard voices she didn't recognize discussing contracts and timelines. Ethan's voice wove through it all, smooth and confident, orchestrating her fate like a conductor leading an orchestra. Then the world exploded. The doors didn't open. They shattered. Wood splintered inward with a force that shook the entire building. Through her blurred vision, Aquila saw something massive filling the doorway. Not a man. Not anymore. Elliot's wolf form was terrifying, easily twice the size of any wolf she'd ever seen, his silver eyes blazing with an otherworldly light. His fur was black as midnight, and when he snarled, the sound was primordial, ancient. The sound of death walking. The room erupted into chaos. Ethan's wolves shifted, launching themselves at the Alpha King. But they were nothing. He tore through them like paper, not killing but incapacitating, brutal and efficient. Bones cracked, bodies hit walls. Within seconds, the floor was littered with groaning, defeated wolves. Ethan had already shifted, his own wolf form impressive but dwarfed by Elliot's. They circled each other, and Aquila wanted to scream, to warn Elliot about the drug they'd given her, but her voice wouldn't come. The fight was savage. Ethan was fast, cunning, using the confined space to his advantage, but Elliot was fury incarnate. Every move was calculated violence, every strike designed to hurt, to punish, to dominate. When Elliot's jaws closed around Ethan's throat, it wasn't a killing blow, it was a claim, a statement, submit or die. Ethan struggled for another moment, then went limp, the submission posture of a defeated wolf. Elliot held him there for several seconds longer than necessary, making sure every wolf in the room understood who ruled here. Then he shifted back to human form, one hand still wrapped around Ethan's throat. Ethan shifted too, gasping, his face pressed against the floor. "If you ever," Elliot said, his voice barely human, "come near her again, I will destroy everything you love, before I kill you. Do you understand?" Ethan nodded, unable to speak. Elliot released him with disgust and moved to Aquila. His hands were gentle as he lifted her, cradling her against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered. "You're safe now." She tried to tell him about the drug, but only a small sound escaped. "Compliance draft," someone said. One of Elliot's wolves had entered, was examining the discarded vial. "It'll wear off in a few hours." Elliot's jaw clenched. He looked down at Aquila, and something in his expression shifted, softened. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly, as if they were alone. "Something I should have told you from the beginning." His thumb brushed her cheek. "You're my mate, Aquila. The bond formed the moment I saw you 6 months ago. That's why I couldn't stay away. Why I've been watching. And why I would burn the world down to keep you safe." His eyes searched hers desperately. "I know you can't respond right now, and maybe that's better. Maybe you need time to process this without the pressure of answering." He stood, holding her close. "When you can speak again, when the drug wears off and you have full control of yourself, I'll ask you properly. I'll give you the choice I should have given you from the start." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "But know this, whether you accept or reject the bond, I will protect you. I will make sure Ethan and his conspirators face justice. You are free, Aquila, truly free for the first time in your life." As he carried her from the room, Aquila felt the drug beginning to loosen its grip. Her fingers twitched, her thoughts cleared slightly, and one question burned through the fog. When she could finally speak, when she had the freedom to choose her own destiny, what would she say to the Alpha King who had saved her? Chapter 10. The drug wore off slowly, like frost melting under morning sun. Aquila woke in an unfamiliar room, soft sheets beneath her, sunlight streaming through tall windows. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The escape, Eunice's betrayal, Ethan's kidnapping, and Elliot. "You're my mate." She sat up carefully, testing her limbs. Everything worked. The fog had lifted completely, leaving her thoughts sharp and clear for the first time in what felt like forever. A knock at the door made her tense. "Come in," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. Elliot entered, and her breath caught. He looked different in the daylight, or less terrifying and more human. Tired, even. There were shadows under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept. "How do you feel?" he asked, keeping his distance. "Like myself again." She met his gaze directly. "We need to talk." "I know." He moved closer, but stopped several feet away, giving her space. "I meant what I said. You're free to choose. The mate bond doesn't obligate you to anything. If you want to leave, to start somewhere new without me, I'll make sure you have the resources and protection to do so." "And if I stay?" Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, carefully restrained. "Then we navigate this together. On your terms." Aquila studied him. This powerful man who had torn through enemies to save her, who could have claimed her by right of the mate bond, but instead offered her freedom. She thought about Ethan, who had tried to cage her with pretty words and false promises. She thought about her family, who had been willing to sacrifice her for survival. And she thought about the question Elliot had asked 6 months ago. "Are you happy?" She hadn't been. Not for a long time. But sitting here now, faced with a genuine choice for the first time in her life, she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Possibility. "I want to go back," she said finally, "to the estate to face my family and Ethan properly. Not as a runaway bride or a victim, but as myself." Elliot nodded slowly. "I'll take you there. And I want you beside me when I do it." His eyes widened slightly. "Aquila, I'm not saying I'm ready to accept the mate bond completely. I barely know you." She stood, crossing to where he waited. "But I know you've shown me more respect and honesty in 2 days than Ethan did in months. I know you saved my life, and I know that when I think about my future, about what comes next, I don't want to face it alone." "You won't have to," he said quietly. They returned to the Harlow estate 3 days later, not in hiding, but in full view. Elliot's carriage bore his royal crest, announcing exactly who had claimed Aquila's protection. Word had already spread about Ethan's actions, about the contracts with the Eastern Coalition that Elliot had made public. The scandal was devastating. The estate was in chaos when they arrived. Her father looked decades older, her mother barely functional, and Eunice, pale and shaking, stood in the corner like a ghost. Aquila walked into the main hall with Elliot at her side, her head held high. The assembled nobility fell silent, watching. "I will not marry Ethan Blackmore," she announced, her voice carrying through the room. "The engagement is broken, the alliance is void. Any contracts signed on my behalf are hereby contested." Her father started to protest, but Elliot's presence silenced him. "Furthermore," Aquila continued, "I am accepting the protection and courtship of Alpha King Elliot Draxon. This is my choice, made freely and without coercion." The room erupted, gasps, whispers. Her mother fainted, but Aquila didn't waver. Elliot stepped forward, his hand finding hers. "I formally declare my intention to court Aquila Harlow with the intention of making her my queen, should she accept." His voice left no room for argument. "Anyone who takes issue with this can address their concerns directly to me." No one spoke. Now later, as the dust settled and contracts were being rewritten, Aquila stood with Elliot on the estate balcony. The same balcony where she'd once felt trapped. Now it felt different. Open. "My family will never fully recover from this," she said quietly. "No," Elliot agreed. "But they'll survive, and you'll be free of the obligation to save them." She leaned against him, allowing herself the comfort. "What happens to Ethan?" "He's facing formal charges. The council will decide his fate." Elliot's arm came around her shoulders. "He won't trouble you again." "And Eunice, that's your decision." Aquila thought about her sister, about the betrayal and the choices that had led them here. "I need time before I can face her." "Take all the time you need." They stood in comfortable silence until Elliot's expression shifted, becoming troubled. "What is it?" Aquila asked. "One of my scouts just reported something concerning. The Eastern Coalition representatives who were working with Ethan have disappeared. No one knows where they went." A chill ran down her spine. "You think they'll come back?" "I think men who wanted to use you as a political pawn don't give up easily just because one plan failed." His jaw tightened. "And I think we haven't seen the last of this conspiracy." Aquila looked out over the estate grounds, at the life she was leaving behind and the uncertain future ahead. "Then I suppose it's good I have an Alpha King on my side," she said. Elliot's smile was grim. "You have more than that. You have me. Completely." As the sun set over the Harlow estate, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow, Aquila felt the weight of everything that had changed. She had escaped one trap, only to discover a larger conspiracy lurking in the darkness. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing it alone. And somewhere in the distance, in rooms where powerful men made dangerous plans, someone was watching, waiting, already plotting their next move. The game wasn't over, it had only just begun.